Hello everyone, my name is Tom Hitchcock. Dr. Ray Seidler invited me to share my experience of living next to an orchard and the effects of the pesticides applied at the orchard for the Future of Soils conference. This video is a result of that request. Thanks for your time.
Right now we're looking at Anderson Creek, where I live. This creek has been subjected to a lot of abuse through chemical applications and just general neglect, and one of the goals of this video for me is to find help for this creek in becoming wholer and healthier. The first part of this video will take a look at water quality issues in both streams and wells. This will rely heavily on work done by the Department of Environmental Quality here in Oregon. What was found was persistent but low levels of typically herbicides such as diuron, but other chemicals were found in the streams as well, and it's quite an interesting report to see what is actually happening in our water. Now we'll take a look at what's going on underneath the ground. Here's a cross-sectional drawing showing a typical plume of contamination and a series of wells designed to intercept that contamination. This was a line of work that I worked in for about 10 years in designing and building environmental remediation equipment for polluted groundwater. This cross-sectional drawing shows how typical chemicals would enter into the groundwater from the surface through factories, landfills, or pesticide applications, or septic tanks, and how those chemicals would then migrate through the soil and reach other places and other people's wells, for example. Here's rather a remarkable map created by the Department of Environmental Quality, which shows all of the known leaks or chemical spills in the valley here. The map covers the entire state, but I've zoomed into this locality. And each of the icons, which its shape and color delineate certain facets, can be clicked on, as you can see here in a satellite view of the same map, showing one of the sites, and you can then click on that page for further information on any of the particular events that have occurred. Each one of the markers represents a unique event, such going from a scale of, say, a leaking heating oil tank all the way up to a huge multi-acre landfill, for example. I would highly recommend checking this map yourself for any locations that are of concern to you near where you live or get your drinking water from. Here's a chart from the state study that shows basically the primary chemicals that were found in wells in the Bear Creek Watershed. You can see the atrazine, 2,4-D, and I'm not going to read the next one, and acetamiprid. Of course, that's the neonicotinoid, and then the DDT legacy and diuron are all present there. So those are the chemicals that are in the wells in this valley that the state found. And they found those wells, they found those contaminants in about 40% of those wells. To be fair, pesticides are not the only chemicals of concern in well water or other drinking water. As you can see from the a page from that same document, that there is nitrites in the well, bacteria, arsenic, other heavy metals, and quite a panoply of things that one might want to get tested for if one's relying on a source of water from the ground. The second part of the video will focus on what it's like living next to an orchard and observing spray and drift, and what the significance of that might be for people and workers living adjacent to orchards. The reason toxic pesticides are used is to prevent damage to the commercial product that the pear orchards produce. Unfortunately, the downside of this is that the contaminants remain in the pears. Here's an article from AOL Lifestyle in 2017 that's saying this year pears were added to the Dirty Dozen list. When sampling non-organic pears, the USDA had found that the amount of pesticide residues on pears more than doubled since 2010, from 0.6 of a part per million to 1.3 parts per million. More than half of the pears sampled were concluded to have 5 or more types of pesticide residue, with some samples amounting to 20 pesticides. Understanding spray drift. In order to do this, I'd like to make the analogy of a sleeper wave in the ocean, which relies on several smaller waves grouping together to cause a large wave which can seriously injure people. Like most waves, most applications are not directly harming those nearby, but when several factors converge, trouble can happen. The factors that would make for a serious event would include proximity to the spraying, the wind direction, the nature of the application as to what type of poison and how long it might persist, and also what things might be vulnerable. These would include food plants, outdoor pets, children, beneficial insects, and soil biota, all of which can be affected by the random drifts occurring. Many of the highly toxic applications that are made are colorless and odorless, so if these chemicals do migrate into one's property, you really have no way of knowing that this has occurred, other than, say in my case, the fact that almost all the insects are gone and never return. Farm workers often bear the worst brunt of pesticide poisoning, being in proximity to it. For example, here's an article in Mother Jones describing the effects on workers who were gassed in the field accidentally. This third article is a graph showing that in the town of Shafter in California, the level of chlorpyrifos was 44 times higher than the state levels allowed. Here's an excellent study published on the National Institute of Health website entitled Farmers' Exposure to Pesticides, Toxicity Types and Ways of Prevention. This is an excellent article. It's about 10 pages long, and it very, very articulately describes the various means by which people can be exposed to pesticides. Neighborly relations. I've lived and worked next to this orchard for about 10 years and observed several things. One is the application of various pesticides and other substances, and the other is the loss of biota in the environment, and the loss of earwigs, flies, beetles, all manner of things that were once here are no longer present. I attribute this mostly to the neonicotinoid pesticide applications, which seem to have only started to occur recently and are to combat mites in the orchards. Generally speaking, I'm on very good terms with the orchard and the employees there. My only complaint with them is the use of the toxic synthetic pesticides to kill various organisms. Their only complaint with me is that I take photographs of them applying various things in the orchard adjacent to my house. I did complain to the state about one application that I perceived drifting into the backyard, and as a result of that, the orchard has changed their policies and practices to some degree. They're much more diligent when observing people approaching on the road when the tractors are near the roadway, for example, and they took down 2 rows of trees adjacent to my backyard, which means that the tractor doesn't apply the spray within 10 feet of the yard, but more like 50 feet away, and I greatly appreciate this as the drift does dissipate with distance, although outgassing and other forms of toxic trespass still do seem to occur. So they have to do their applications predicated on wind direction, which is very often subject to change in this valley. In response to a complaint that my roommate and I filed, we received a letter from Associated Fruit's lawyer, which basically asserted their right as a agricultural outfit to, according to the legislature of Oregon Code, no farming or forest practices on land zoned for farm or forest use shall give rise to any private right of action or claim for relief based on nuisance or trespass. Nuisance or trespass includes but is not limited to actions or claims based on noise, vibration, odors, smoke, dust, mist from irrigation, use of pesticides, and use of crop production substances. Well, that contradicts what, if you called the state up and say, what do I do if pesticides coming into my yard? They'll say, well, no pesticide is allowed to come into your yard. But because the pesticides are odorless, colorless, and the applications often occur before you get up, it's very difficult to assert your rights unless something horrible happens and something dies, like your pet. Or, seriously, the only thing that seems to have legal standing in this case is if your pesticide damages the crops of another grower nearby, which seems to be happening more and more frequently with the convergence of cannabis, grapes, and the traditional orchards. This brief video is to show the effects of the Jackson County roadside spraying program. Typically this happens a couple of times a year, and the substances used would be a Roundup derivative or a tricloper. Typically these applications seem to happen in the morning on school days, and my concern with this is that people would be exposed to these chemicals, as would their animals if they were walking their dogs. The county applies these chemicals to eliminate unwanted vegetation beside the road, and they do it unless you specifically give them a letter advising them not to. So if you live on Culver Road or any county road, you potentially could be sprayed by these chemicals. The county believes these chemicals are fairly benign and not dangerous, and is thus not notifying people before their applications. That concludes our brief tour of the toxic vectors of the Rogue Valley. As you will see, there are quite a few things that it'd be good to be very aware of, such as potential contaminants of well water, why streams are not safe to swim in, and why some neighborhoods might be potentially gassed by toxic vapors. Thank you so much for your time and interest in this very pertinent matter that affects us all.